He said he only wanted to stay friends. 6 months later, he asked for a second chance I no longer needed. My name is Sophia Bennett, and I'm 28 years old. The night Ethan Carter texted me, "I really like you, but I think we should just stay friends." My world didn't shatter the way it does in the movies. I didn't cry, call anyone, or send a long message asking what I'd done wrong. I just stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone as those 16 words replayed in my head until they no longer looked like a text. They felt like a verdict. I kept waiting for anger, sadness, or denial to hit. Instead, all I felt was a quiet, exhausting emptiness, like I'd spent months climbing towards something that had never really been there. Leaning against the counter, I asked myself one question. Had I imagined everything? Maybe not everything, but enough of it. I typed a single reply. "Thank you for being honest." Before I could second-guess myself, I hit send, placed my phone face down on the counter, and let out a breath I'd apparently been holding for months. I didn't realize it then, but that message wasn't really for Ethan. It was the first step toward letting go. I had met Ethan about a year earlier through mutual friends. He wasn't the loudest or funniest person in the room, but he had an easy confidence that drew people in. He listened when others talked, remembered the little things, and had a way of making you feel like you mattered without seeming to try. Our friendship grew naturally through group dinners, movie nights, weekend hikes, and long conversations after everyone else had gone home. Nothing about it was dramatic or officially romantic, but somewhere along the way, it became something that meant far more to me than either of us ever said out loud. Somewhere along the way, our conversations became longer than everyone else's. Ethan started calling whenever work overwhelmed him, after arguments with his parents, or on nights he couldn't sleep. We'd sometimes stay on the phone until 1 or 2 in the morning, talking about everything from childhood memories to ridiculous conspiracy theories we'd still be laughing about the next day. Before I realized it, he had become the first person I wanted to tell whenever something good happened. I believed I'd become that person for him too. Looking back, that was my biggest mistake. I confused emotional closeness with emotional commitment. I didn't fall in love with Ethan all at once. It happened so gradually that I never noticed the moment it changed. Every small interaction felt like another step toward a future neither of us ever put into words. When his favorite sushi restaurant closed, I spent hours finding another place with almost the same menu. When his earbuds broke, I bought him a new pair for his birthday. If he had a rough week, I'd bring coffee before work. If he needed to vent, I answered, whether it was noon or midnight. None of it felt like a sacrifice. It was simply how I cared for him. Ethan never discouraged me. If anything, he made me feel welcome in nearly every part of his life. At movie nights, he naturally sat beside me, and when something made him laugh too hard, he'd lean against me, or jokingly rest his head on my shoulder. "You know you're my favorite person, right?" I'd smile. "So you say." I mean it. Looking back, I understand why those moments mattered so much to me. They weren't promises, but they felt close enough that I stopped noticing the difference. Our friends teased us more than once. "So, when are you two finally admitting you're dating?" Ethan would just grin and change the subject. I laughed along with everyone else, convincing myself he was simply waiting for the right time. I never asked what we were, because I was afraid of hearing an answer I didn't want. That went on for 6 months. Without realizing it, I built my schedule around his. If he needed help moving, I canceled my plans. If he'd had a bad day, I showed up with dinner. When he got promoted, I organized a surprise celebration with our friends. Everyone praised how thoughtful I was, and Ethan always thanked me with a hug and a grateful smile. At the time, I thought gratitude meant we were moving towards something more. It didn't. The signs had been there all along. I was almost always the one reaching out first, making plans, or checking in. If I stopped texting for a few days, our conversations usually stopped too. I brushed it off with the same excuses every time. He was busy, stressed, or simply bad at texting. I believed them because I wanted to. Love has a remarkable way of explaining away every warning your instincts try to give you. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, Ethan texted me, "I really like you, but I think we should just stay friends." There was no explanation, no difficult conversation beforehand, just one sentence. What stunned me wasn't the rejection. It was realizing I'd been living in a relationship that had existed mostly in my own imagination. After staring at the screen for a few minutes, I replied with 5 words. "Thank you for being honest." No questions, no accusations, no attempt to change his mind. For months, I'd been treating Ethan like he was already my boyfriend. The truth was, he'd never claimed that role. Maybe he never intended to. I'd simply filled in the blanks myself. I couldn't change how he felt, but I could change how I responded. That night, I made myself one promise. If Ethan wanted us to be friends, then I would finally treat him like one. No more dropping everything when he called, planning my life around his, or giving him the kind of attention I'd only give someone I loved. For the first time in months, I chose myself. I honestly thought that was the end of our story. It wasn't. The next morning, I reached for my phone out of habit, ready to send him the usual good morning message. My thumb hovered over our chat before I stopped myself. "We're just friends now." I locked my phone and got ready for work. Breaking that routine felt stranger than I expected. I'd spent months fitting my days around Ethan without ever realizing how much space he'd taken up in my life. Over the next few days, I quietly changed the way I treated him. Not to punish him or make him jealous, but because I was finally acting like an actual friend instead of an unofficial girlfriend. When he texted during lunch asking if I wanted dinner, I didn't answer right away. I replied, after work. Can't tonight. Already made plans. Maybe another time. A week earlier, I would have canceled everything to see him. This time I didn't. Instead, I started saying yes to my own life. I signed up for a Saturday pottery class, joined a morning yoga group, picked up reading again before bed instead of waiting for Ethan's late-night calls, and reconnected with friends I'd unintentionally pushed aside. Slowly, my world stopped revolving around one person. For the first time in a long while, it felt like it belonged to me again. 3 days later, my phone buzzed just after 11 that night. It was Ethan. You've been kind of quiet lately. Everything okay? 6 months earlier, that message would have made my heart race. This time, I simply replied, yeah, I'm good, just keeping busy. He answered almost immediately. Busy doing what? I set my phone aside, finished the movie I was watching, and replied nearly an hour later. Just life. His typing bubble appeared, disappeared, then appeared again before he finally sent, glad you're okay. For months, I'd been the one waiting on his replies. Now, without planning it, the roles had reversed. A few days later, I woke up to 2 missed calls from Ethan and a text waiting for me. Oops, pocket dial. I smiled. Ethan had never been careless with his phone, but I didn't question it. No worries. That was the end of the conversation. The following weekend, our friend Olivia hosted a barbecue. It was the first time Ethan and I had seen each other since his message. Normally, I would have arrived early to help him set up. Instead, I spent the afternoon catching up with everyone, hugging Olivia, complimenting Daniel's burgers, and talking with Mia about the photography course she'd just finished. Eventually, Ethan walked over and handed me a glass of lemonade. Thought you'd want this. Thanks. We stood there for a moment. In the past, I would have carried the conversation. Instead, Emma called my name from across the yard. Sorry, I said. I promised I'd help with dessert. I walked away before the silence turned awkward. As I crossed the patio, I noticed Ethan watching me with a puzzled expression, as if he couldn't understand why everything suddenly felt different. Over the next few weeks, he started texting more often. Have you seen that new cafe downtown? Want to catch a movie Friday? Sometimes I said yes. Sometimes I didn't. The difference was that my answer depended on my schedule, not his. One afternoon, while a group of us were having coffee, Ethan looked at me and said, You've seemed happier lately. I think I am. What changed? I've been spending more time on myself. He nodded. That's good. The words sounded supportive, but his expression didn't. Not long after that, he began mentioning other women in conversation. A girl at work asked me to lunch. That's nice. A pause. She's not nearly as thoughtful as you. I smiled politely. I'm sure she has her own strengths. A few days later, he tried again. One of my coworkers forgot my birthday. That happens. You would have remembered. I probably would have. He waited as if expecting something more, but I left it there. Months earlier, comments like those would have given me hope. Now they just sounded like comparisons, not confessions. One Friday, our group met downtown for dinner. I chose a seat across the table from Ethan, but halfway through the meal, he got up for a refill and came back to the empty chair beside me, even though there were plenty of others available. As everyone laughed over an old college story, he leaned closer. You've barely talked to me all night. I smiled. I've been talking to everyone. He glanced around the table before quietly saying, Yeah, I noticed. For the first time since I'd met him, Ethan looked uncertain. It was the same uncertainty I'd lived with for months. Now, somehow, it belonged to him. At the time, I thought that conversation had given us the closure we both needed. I couldn't have been more wrong. Ethan wasn't ready to lose the version of me that had always been there whenever he needed me. At first, the changes were subtle. Whenever our group met for dinner, he'd somehow end up sitting beside me. If I arrived first, he'd pull his chair closer. If someone else had taken the seat next to me, he'd casually ask to switch. Months earlier, I would have treated every small gesture as proof he secretly wanted more. Now I simply noticed them. For the first time since we'd met, I was seeing Ethan as he really was, instead of who I'd hoped he'd become. One Saturday afternoon, our friends met at a downtown street food festival. Rachel and I were deciding which dessert stand to try when Ethan walked over carrying 2 iced coffees. He handed one to me. Your usual. Vanilla cold brew. Exactly how I always ordered it. Thanks. He smiled. I wasn't sure you'd still like it. I do. We wandered through the festival talking about work, movies, and vacation plans until he asked, almost casually, So, are you seeing anyone? I looked at him. What do you mean? You know, dating. Not really. He nodded a little too quickly. Oh. The relief in his voice was impossible to miss. Over the next few weeks, he kept finding small ways to remind everyone how well he knew me. If someone suggested Italian food, he'd point out that I preferred sushi. If a friend forgot my birthday, Ethan answered before I could. During movie night, he showed up with my favorite snacks without asking. Months earlier, gestures like those would have given me hope. Now I understood they were thoughtful, but they weren't the same as commitment. One evening, after everyone else had left Rachel's apartment, Ethan waited by the door while I searched for my keys. "You've changed." "So I've been told." He watched me for a moment before asking quietly, "You don't look at me the same anymore." "I probably don't." "Why?" I slipped my keys into my purse. "Because I'm finally seeing what's actually here, instead of what I hoped would be." He looked down and gave a faint, tired smile. "I guess I deserve that. I wasn't trying to hurt you." "I know." Even so, he walked away looking like someone who'd just lost an argument he hadn't expected to have. Not long after, our friends began noticing the shift between us. One afternoon, Rachel called. "Ethan asked if you've been avoiding him." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. I said you're treating him exactly the way he asked to be treated." "And?" She laughed. He didn't like hearing it. After that, something about Ethan changed. Instead of moving on, he started comparing me to other women. At lunch one day, he mentioned a coworker. "She helped me with a project. She's great, but she's nowhere near as patient as you." I smiled politely. "I'm sure she has qualities I don't." A week later, it happened again. "The woman I've been seeing keeps forgetting little things." "That happens." He looked straight at me. "You never forgot anything." "Honestly, I don't think anyone's ever paid attention to me the way you did." Months earlier, those words would have meant everything. Now they only raised one question. Why did he finally appreciate me only after deciding he didn't want me? Sitting on my balcony one evening, I finally stopped making excuses for him. Ethan wasn't trying to start a relationship. He was trying to get back the certainty of knowing someone would always put him first. Once I admitted that to myself, the confusion disappeared. For the first time, I stopped trying to explain his behavior. Understanding his reasons no longer mattered. Moving on did. The pattern became impossible to ignore at Daniel's birthday dinner. Our group had rented a private room at a rooftop restaurant, and the moment I walked in, Ethan looked up and smiled. Throughout the evening, he kept finding reasons to pull me into conversations. Sophia would know. "Ask Sophia. You remember that trip, don't you?" I answered whenever someone spoke to me, then went back to talking with everyone else. Eventually, he leaned over. "You've barely talked to me all night." I smiled. "I've been talking to everyone." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I noticed." There was something unfamiliar in his voice. For months, I'd been the one leaving gatherings wondering why I always felt invisible. Now he was experiencing that feeling himself. 3 days later, I was relaxing on the couch after work when Instagram sent me a notification. "Ethan Carter tagged you in a post." Curious, I opened the notification. My stomach sank. It was an old photo from a beach trip nearly a year earlier. Everyone else had been cropped out, leaving only Ethan and me. I was laughing as I handed him a bottle of water, and without any context, it looked like a picture of a couple. The caption read, "Some people remind you what genuine kindness looks like. Grateful for the memories, Sophia." Within minutes, the comments started pouring in. "Wait, are you two back together?" "I knew you'd end up together." Finally! Reading them, I understood exactly what had happened. Whether Ethan intended it or not, he'd created the impression that there was still something between us, undoing months of distance with a single post. I opened our chat. Me. "Hey, could you remove the tag from your post? People think we're dating." His reply came almost immediately. "Ethan, why? It's just a nice memory." Me. "We're friends. I'd rather people know the truth." After a short pause, he answered again. "Ethan, you're taking it too seriously." I didn't argue. 15 minutes later, the tag disappeared. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. I muted his stories, locked my phone, and realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply exhausted by mixed signals and by trying to make sense of someone whose actions never matched his words. I honestly believed the hardest part was over. I had no idea Ethan was running out of ways to pull me back into his life, and people often become the most persistent only after they realize they're no longer the center of someone else's world. After that, life grew unexpectedly peaceful. Weeks passed without me wondering whether Ethan would text or call, and the silence I used to fear became something I genuinely enjoyed. It gave me space to focus on myself again. As autumn settled in, work became busier, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. I finally enrolled in the design certification course I'd been putting off, started going to the gym before work, and spent Friday nights with friends without quietly hoping Ethan would sit beside me. My routine hadn't changed as much as I had. Instead of pouring my energy into wondering whether someone else chose me, I started investing it in becoming someone I was proud of. One Tuesday afternoon, my manager asked if I could help another department finish a marketing presentation. "They're short one person. It'll probably only be for a couple of weeks." I agreed without thinking much about it. That's how I met Daniel Brooks. He looked up from his laptop as I walked into the conference room, stood, and offered his hand. "You must be Sophia. I'm Daniel." There was nothing dramatic about that first meeting. No instant chemistry or movie-style sparks. Just two coworkers trying to survive a tight deadline. Oddly enough, that was exactly what made it memorable. Over the next few weeks, we worked together almost every day, and I quickly noticed how different he was. Daniel never expected me to carry the conversation. He listened as much as he spoke, paid attention to my answers instead of waiting for his turn to talk, and when I disagreed with one of his ideas, he simply smiled. "Tell me what you're thinking." The simplicity of that sentence caught me off guard. After spending so long trying to decode mixed signals, straightforward communication felt surprisingly refreshing. One evening, we were still finishing a client proposal when Daniel glanced at the clock. "I think we've earned dinner," I laughed. "I was just thinking the same thing." He pointed toward this cafe across the street. "They make great sandwiches." "No fancy restaurant?" I teased. He grinned. "Only if you're planning to judge my taste." "I'm not." "Good, because sandwiches were all I had in mind." I laughed harder than I expected. For the first time in a long while, I was with someone who wasn't trying to impress me or keep me guessing. He was simply being himself, and somehow that felt far more attractive. Dinner stretched into nearly 3 hours without either of us noticing. We talked about childhood memories, favorite books, embarrassing first jobs, and the places we still hope to visit one day. The conversation never felt forced. The conversation came easily. At one point, Daniel admitted he'd once walked into an executive meeting with the wrong presentation. "You actually survived that?" I asked, laughing. "Barely. What happened?" My boss started asking questions, and I kept answering with complete confidence about the wrong slideshow. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my drink. "It was the most professional disaster of my career," he said, shaking his head. What struck me wasn't the story. It was how effortless everything felt. I never found myself searching for hidden meaning or wondering what he really meant. If Daniel enjoyed spending time with me, he said so. As we left the cafe, he smiled. "I had fun tonight." "So did I. We should do it again." "I'd like that." He laughed, assuming I don't accidentally send you another spreadsheet instead of the dinner reservation. There were no mixed signals or emotional games, just two people enjoying each other's company. Over the next month, one dinner became coffee turned into weekend walks, and before long, we were spending afternoons wandering bookstores, museums, and quiet parks. Nothing felt rushed. We never pressured each other to define the relationship. We simply kept making plans because we genuinely wanted to. One evening, we sat beside the river, watching the sun disappear behind the skyline. Daniel skipped a stone across the water before glancing at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. You always seem like you're waiting for something to go wrong." The question caught me off guard. "What makes you think that?" "You apologize all the time, before disagreeing, before asking for anything, even if you think you've talked too much." I stared at the water. I'd never noticed. He spoke gently. "It's like you're worried people will leave if you become inconvenient." For a moment, I couldn't answer because he was right. Months of chasing someone who never fully chose me had quietly changed the way I saw myself. "I guess I'm still unlearning that." He nodded. "We all unlearn things, but you don't have to earn your place with the right people." The words stayed with me long after that evening. As the weeks passed, I noticed something else. I had stopped checking my phone every few minutes or analyzing every message for hidden meaning. Being with Daniel felt calm, and for the first time, I realized calm wasn't boring. It was healthy. One Saturday, we found a small rooftop cafe overlooking the city. Before we left, the waitress offered to take a picture. "You two look happy." Daniel laughed. "That's probably the coffee." "I'm pretty sure it isn't," she teased. Later that evening, I looked through my photos and smiled at the picture. It wasn't staged or dramatic, just two people looking genuinely comfortable together. Without thinking much about it, I posted it. "Good company. Beautiful view." The next morning, Rachel called before I'd finished breakfast. "Ethan saw your picture." "I'm sure he did." She hesitated. "He's been asking everyone who Daniel is." I sighed. "I don't want this to become some kind of competition." "I know. I've moved on. I hope he does too." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "I don't think he's there yet." That evening, Daniel and I met for dinner after work. We laughed through another one of his ridiculous office stories and wandered downtown before heading home. I changed into comfortable clothes, made myself a cup of tea, settled onto the couch with a book, and finally relaxed. Around 9:30, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" For a few seconds, all I heard was breathing. Then a familiar voice broke the silence. "Sophia." It was Ethan. Oddly, hearing his voice no longer made my heart race. It only made me wonder why he was calling. "Ethan?" "Yeah. I wasn't sure you'd answer." I almost didn't. He gave a quiet, tired laugh. "I guess I earned that. What did you want to talk about?" "I saw your picture." "The one with Daniel?" "Yeah." He hesitated before saying softly, "You look really happy." "I am." His reply didn't come right away. Instead, he took a slow breath. I messed up. 6 months earlier, those 4 words would have been enough to turn my whole world upside down. Now, I simply waited for him to continue. I kept telling myself we were better as friends. I wasn't ready for a relationship, so I convinced myself nothing really had to change. He paused. "I honestly thought you'd always be there." "What made you realize you were wrong?" "I started thinking about everything you did for me." He laughed quietly, embarrassed. "You remembered the little things without me ever asking. The days I was overwhelmed, the things I forgot, the moments I needed someone. You always showed up." His voice dropped. "And I never stopped to ask who was showing up for you." A sadness settled over me. Not because I still wanted him, because he was finally seeing the weight I'd carried alone for so long. I've replayed everything in my head, he continued. The dinners, the gifts, the late night drives. I kept telling myself that's just who you were. It wasn't. No, you did those things because you loved me. Yes, and I accepted them like they cost you nothing. His voice cracked. I was selfish. I got comfortable being the person you always chose. I know. You already knew? I figured it out a long time ago. Another quiet moment passed before he finally asked, "Can we try again?" I closed my eyes for a second, not to think, only to make sure I answered honestly. I've changed. I can see that. I was scared. I believe you. I didn't understand what I had until I lost you. There it was. The sentence I'd imagined hearing more times than I could count. Only now, it no longer had the power I once believed it would. Ethan, I don't think you actually miss me. He said nothing. I think you miss what I gave you. Still nothing. You miss having someone who always remembered the little things. Someone who answered every call, showed up whenever you needed them, and made you feel like the most important person in the room. His breathing was the only sound between us. You miss being loved. I let the words settle before finishing. But that's different from loving someone. That's not fair, isn't it? I cared about you. I know you did. I always cared. I never doubted that. Then I asked the one question that mattered. If Daniel had never come into my life, would you have called me tonight? The silence stretched. For the first time, he didn't rush to protect himself with an excuse. Finally, he answered, I don't know. I smiled to myself. Ironically, hearing the truth made everything easier. Thank you. For what? For being honest. I wish I'd been honest sooner. So do I. He exhaled slowly. I've compared every woman I've met to you these past few months. I kept looking for someone who made me feel the way you did. And? I couldn't. I looked out the window before answering. You weren't looking for another me. I paused. You were looking for another person willing to love you the way I did. That's because you weren't looking for another woman. He sounded confused. What do you mean? You weren't looking for me. You were looking for another version of me. Someone who would always give, always forgive, always wait, and never ask for the same in return. I shook my head. That's not love. No one should have to live like that. His breathing grew shaky. I really do love you. For a moment, I believed he believed that. But love discovered only after someone walks away is complicated. Sometimes it's love. Sometimes it's regret. Sometimes it's simply the fear of losing something that always felt guaranteed. I think what you're feeling right now is regret, I said gently. He didn't argue. Regret makes you replay every memory and imagine how things could have turned out differently. But you can't build a future on wishing you'd made different choices. When he spoke again, I could hear him crying. So, this is really over? I looked around my apartment. The bookshelf Daniel had helped me assemble, the flowers he'd surprised me with on his way home, the quiet that finally felt comforting instead of lonely. No, I said softly, this isn't the end. It's a new beginning, for both of us. I hope one day you choose someone while you still have the chance, and I hope you never make her question where she stands. His voice broke. I'm sorry, Sophia. I know. I really am. A small nod was all I gave him. I hope you can forgive me. A small smile found its way through my tears. I already have. Not because he'd earned it. Because I didn't want to carry the weight of resentment into the life I'd finally built. Forgiveness didn't mean opening the door again. It meant closing it without bitterness. I should let you go, he whispered. You probably should. After a long pause, he spoke one last time. I hope Daniel knows how lucky he is. I glanced at the framed photo on my bookshelf. I think we're both pretty lucky. A quiet laugh escaped him. I guess we are. Goodbye, Ethan. Goodbye, Sophia. The call ended. I set my phone down and stood in the silence. Months ago, I thought happiness meant hearing Ethan choose me. For the first time, I realized I no longer needed him to. I didn't call Rachel or replay the conversation. Instead, I watched the city lights shimmer outside until there was nothing left to figure out. For the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. For the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. The next morning, sunlight filled my apartment before my alarm went off. Out of habit, I reached for my phone and found a message from Daniel. Good morning. Hope your presentation goes well today. Don't forget breakfast this time. I smiled. He remembered I'd skip breakfast whenever I was nervous before a presentation. Not because I'd reminded him, but because he'd been paying attention. That was the difference. One person noticed me. The other appreciated me. That evening, Daniel met me outside my office. How'd the presentation go? We got the contract. His face lit up. I knew you could do it. There was no teasing or making the moment about himself. He celebrated my success as if it mattered just as much to him as it did to me. Over dinner, he caught me smiling. What? Nothing. That doesn't look like nothing. I laughed. I was just thinking. Should I be worried? Probably not. So, what were you thinking? I looked at him for a second. You make life feel easy. He smiled. I'll happily accept that compliment. A few weeks later, Rachel invited everyone over for game night. My first instinct was to make an excuse, but I realized I didn't need one anymore. When Daniel and I arrived, Ethan was already there. Our eyes met across the room, and we exchanged the kind of polite smile you give someone whose place in your life has already changed. There was no tension, no resentment, and no urge to revisit the past. We were simply two people moving in different directions. For most of the evening, we barely spoke, not because we were avoiding each other, but because neither of us needed the other's attention anymore. At one point, Rachel asked Daniel how we'd met. He laughed. Sophia saved our marketing project. That's not true. It absolutely is. You did half the work. I had the easier half. Everyone laughed, and the conversation moved on. Only later did I realize something that would have been impossible a few months earlier. I had no idea where Ethan had been sitting for most of the night. Somewhere during that evening, I realized I hadn't thought about Ethan once. A few months earlier, that would have been impossible. As people began saying their goodbyes, Daniel helped Rachel carry dishes into the kitchen, while I stepped onto the balcony for some fresh air. The cool evening breeze reminded me of the night Ethan had called. A moment later, the sliding door opened. It was Ethan. He stayed several feet away. I hope you don't mind. Not at all. For a while, we simply looked out over the city. Finally, he spoke. I wanted to thank you. For what? For answering my call. You didn't have to. I think we both needed that conversation. He nodded. I've been seeing a therapist. That surprised me. I realized I'd spent years expecting people to love me the way you did without ever learning how to love someone the way they deserved. He looked down with a small, embarrassed smile. I'm trying to change that. I'm glad. I mean that. I know. He nodded. I don't expect anything from you anymore. I just wanted you to know. You changed my life. For the first time since we'd met, I believed he wasn't asking me for anything. He simply wanted me to know how he felt. I smiled. I think we changed each other's. I think you're right. The balcony door opened again. There you are, Daniel said with a smile. We're heading out. I'll be right there. Ethan took a step back. Take care of yourself, Sophia. You too, Ethan. Those were the last words we ever shared. On the drive home, Daniel reached over and took my hand. You seem deep in thought. I am. The good kind? I smiled. The best kind. What are you thinking about? I watched the city lights drift past the window. For a long time, I thought losing someone meant I wasn't enough. I looked at him. I don't believe that anymore. What changed? I thought about the woman I'd been a year earlier, the one who believed love had to be earned by giving more, asking for less, and waiting a little longer every time. Then I looked at Daniel. He had never once made me prove I was worth loving. You did, I said. He laughed. I don't think I deserve that much credit. No, I replied with a smile, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. I do. Meeting you mattered, but the biggest change was finally choosing myself. He looked at me for a moment before leaning over to kiss my forehead as we stopped at a red light. I'm really glad you did. So am I. Every now and then, someone asks what happened between Ethan and me. I usually smile and tell them, we wanted different things. It's the shortest answer. The more honest one is that I never lost the person I was meant to end up with. I simply outgrew the version of myself who believed love meant constantly proving her worth. If I'd never met Ethan, I probably would have spent years believing one-sided love was normal. That's not something I wish I'd carried into the rest of my life. Whenever I think back, my mind always returns to the same text. I really like you, but I think we should just stay friends. For a long time, I thought my reply, thank you for being honest, was for Ethan. Only much later did I realize I'd really been saying it to myself. The hardest part wasn't letting him go. It was letting go of the future I'd imagined for us. Daniel was already waiting beside the car when I walked outside. He looked up, smiled, and held out his hand. Ready? I smiled. More than ever. This time I didn't look back.